heard it expressed before. And let me just read portions of this handwritten note that Arafat's aide gave to Reverend Jackson when I met him there in South Africa. We are not interested in raising an ideological issue against Israel. Therefore, we will not support statements against Zionism, nor are we going to support statements equating Zionism with racism. Furthermore, we will condemn, as we have always done, the Holocaust as the most murderous racist crime of the 20th century. It was perpetuated by white Europeans against the Jews and certainly not by brown or black Arabs. Our respect for the Jewish religion and its practitioners need not be reemphasized, as we Muslims believe Judaism is one of the three great non-atheistic religions that we believe in. 2/3 of the Quran centers on Jewish prophets and traditions. Furthermore, we believe in the sanctity of human life for everybody. What then are we really asking this conference to do? And then he goes on to talk about some of the issues that divide them. But this was a statement, handwritten statement, that came early on in the conference that Arafat had agreed to have Reverend Jackson publicize. And then, as events would have it, the same day this statement was delivered to Reverend Jackson, tanks rolled into Hebron. And Arafat was furious that as he is trying to establish peace in South Africa, he is hearing from Israel and from Palestine that things aren't going well in the country, and he was very angry about that. But yet his ultimate statement was, and the ultimate resolution that we have to remember, there was no mention of Israel in the final document, and more importantly, there was no reference to Zionism as racism at the conference. So the issue that America bowed out of did not materialize. It was debated and discussed, but it was never in the final document, and hundreds of nations, over 160 nations, agreed that was the case. Let me say one other thing about the issue of Israel and how that was resolved, particularly from the Americans' point of view. It was interesting the way the press covered this as well. None of the major stations were there. ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, they were not there regularly. CNN was there. And all of the world and European and other stations covered the conference extensively. But what you would get here would be snippets of the most controversial and often misleading aspects of the conference. You didn't get any daily coverage. There was a delegation sent to the United States led by Michael Southwick, a member of the Bush administration. And what's important to remember is that the American delegation, they came late. They never took their seats in the plenary session. Let me be clear about that. They were there, but they never took their seats in the plenary session. For the first few days of the conference, the United States was represented not by a Bush delegation, but by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. They said, we are here, the American seats are open, we're American representatives of the government, so we're going to sit here. And so they sat there, John Conyers, Eddie Bernice Johnson, Cynthia McKinney, and many others. There were 9 of them there, and they sat there during the discussions. So they came late, they never took their seats, they were out in the hall discussing, debating issues, but they didn't take their seats, and then they left early. They left before the conference even had a draft document in terms of what it would consider. So it gives you a sense of the real extent of the involvement of the United States. And so they didn't get a chance to talk about the treatment of the Dalits or the unclean people in India. They didn't get a chance to talk about the Roma people. They didn't get a chance to talk about the women from Bosnia who were victims of racism and sexism, who were placed into sex camps. They didn't get a chance to meet the thousands of Africans who identified themselves as slaves from regions in Africa and who said that how they'd been treated. They didn't get a chance to meet the people who were victims of racism from around the world. The Lawyers' Human Rights Committee brought over 25 people worldwide who were victims of racism in some form, who have been brutalized, whose relatives have lost their life, or in some way had been victims of racism worldwide. And we missed the opportunity to hear these personal stories, not papers, not speeches, but personal stories of victims of racism worldwide. So we missed that opportunity to participate in that dialogue. And they missed the opportunity to see the sometimes fractious, sometimes very combustible, sometimes very complementary relationship even among the Arab nations. When Arafat was talking about peace and reconciliation with Israel, there were other Arab nations saying he speaks for himself and not for us. That was a surprise to me, but it was clear that he didn't carry the day in everything that he had to say. There were serious discussions. So that's half of the issue of the points not covered. Let me talk about the other half and how it relates to what's happening now. Reparations. It's very interesting that very early on, before we even reached the summer, Tony Blair came to the United States and met with the president last summer. And both of them made it clear that they were equivocal about whether they're going to participate in the World Conference Against Racism. And I guess you aren't surprised why Great Britain was a little reluctant to talk about racism. It's not current day events, but it was clear that if you're going to talk about racism, that you had to look at colonialism and slavery as the twin evils of past centuries that have a lot to do with racial practices and the legacies of racial practices in the 21st century. And so it was clear that they did not want to play a role in dealing with that. And what's very interesting is that many of you know that I've been involved in the reparations movement and one of the lead attorneys in the Reparations Coordinating Committee, that their legal reason for not participating, and you think about this, I mean, even in a 5-week first-year law student would know better than this. Their argument was that if we have a discussion about racism and there is a judgment about slavery and colonialism being crimes against humanity, it might make us liable as a nation. That was the argument. I wish it were that simple. I can go to South Africa, get a vote, and come back and say, okay, I won the reparations case, pay me. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. But that was the essence of the argument. We can't participate in those debates because there might be some sort of resolution adopted that we would find unacceptable and that would create problems for future litigation. And that was the essence of the argument. Not that slavery didn't occur, not that we shouldn't apologize for the horrors of slavery, but that if we acknowledge that slavery was a crime against humanity, then we are, in a sense, acknowledging our guilt and a potential lawsuit. Well, as you all may now know, the conference ultimately adopted just that language, that slavery and colonialism are crimes against humanity, which is a term of art. And that was adopted by those who attended the conference because they understood, as South Africa understood in the 1990s with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, if we're going to go forward and make racial progress, we have to go back and not ignore our history. South Africa went through that in the early 1990s when they had to have Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela, in addition to Peter Botha and all types of whites, come forward and talk about crimes they had committed, race-based crimes, against individuals or groups that had something to do with the apartheid period, and to an extent be given immunity, criminal immunity from prosecution by honestly admitting their past behavior. And throughout South Africa that happened, and that's why you had one of the few bloodless revolutions in a country that had so much racial strife for so long. And so even though the United States wasn't there, the two things that they feared the most happened and didn't happen. There was no, in a sense, trashing of Israel in any document, and the world decided that slavery and colonialism are crimes against humanity. So those issues were addressed. How's it relevant today?